Hello everyone, and welcome to my collection video of a collection of Beatles oldies. Now this is a UK album which often gets forgotten about or overlooked in their discography, although this was kind of the first proper UK Beatles compilation album released in 1966. Now, interestingly, this album has only been pressed once in mono to date. It was only ever released in 1966 in mono, and every other release has just been in stereo. Now, every single song on here had previously been released in the UK, apart from side 2, track 2, Bad Boy, and that had been released in the US, but this was the first time it was released in the UK on this album, the only place you could get it. Okay, so let's take a look at the mono first pressing variation A. And here's the mono label. It's got the Gramophone Company Limited and it's on the sans serif font. Now, there is a variation B of this, which is the only kind of alternate label you can get, and it is the most subtle difference ever. But believe it or not, for months and months after discovering it, I couldn't find a variation B. It was only quite recently I was able to get one. Anyway, it's to do with the position of the soles in the UK. Now, as you can see, the S on the end of lists, so this S here, that ends just above the 1 in 7016. But that's going to change for the variation B. So just keep that in mind. And this copy here is just a duplicate of that same pressing, so just another copy of the variation A. This is in better condition, this copy though, actually. So here is the variation B. Right, so here's this label. Now let's take a look over here. As you can see, the S in lists now clearly ends over the 6 rather than the 1. So that's changed slightly. And also, for some reason, the 0 in 7016 kind of looks like it's been coloured in by mistake. Not that that's a rare mispress or anything, but that's like that for some reason. On side 2 it's the same. Right, so that's the end of the monos, because they weren't pressed again after that in the 60s, or the 80s, or the 90s, and of course it wasn't included in the mono box set, but that's because they've replaced it with the mono masters, which I suppose is better because you get more stuff on that. But yep, that was the end of the album in mono, so now we must move on to the stereos. So here's the first pressing stereo. Now, this is a very nice copy actually. This is probably the nicest 60s copy I've got of this album. And also, the sleeve is made by Ernest J. Day & Co. Limited. Now, this album was the very last album to be made by Ernest J. Day. After this, they didn't do any of the covers anymore, and they were all Goward and Lofthouse. Now, there is something else special about this cover, because it's made by Ernest J. Day, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Right, so here's the stereo first pressing label. Now, there are 3 variations of this label, so I'll talk you through those in a second. But as you can see, it is exactly the same as the mono label, except of course for the stereo in the top corner. And that's got a nice KT tax code in the middle there. Now, the variation on this is actually obvious, and that is the stereo up here. It's very large now, although as you'll see in the next 2 variations, that shrinks down just so it's the usual size that you see on the label, so it'll be a lot smaller than the big silver stereo there. Okay, now here is the variation B. This one came out sort of middle of 1967, so it's a little bit later than the original stereo issue. However, it's still very similar. And as you can see on the back, when it focuses, Goward and Lofthouse Limited have made this sleeve. Now, I said there was something different about the Ernest J. Day sleeves, so let's compare them now. So here is a variation B with a Goward and Lofthouse sleeve. Now, the thing to look at is the stereo in the corner. As you can see, the stereo here is in the white part of the photo, and it doesn't come into the actual colourful part. But if we look at the Ernest J. Day copy here, it goes over the border and comes into the purple sky here. I'm not entirely sure why Ernest J. Day sleeves are like that, but their factories made them with the stereo kind of set a little bit further downwards. So that's a little interesting feature. And here is the variation B label. Now, as you can see, the stereo has reduced in size so that it's back to its normal size, and it's not the huge stereo as was on the variation A. Now, another thing worth pointing out about this label is that this is the only yellow and black parlophone label to have the dates for the songs on both sides of the label. So it's got some on the left and it's got some on the right over here underneath the PCS, but no other label has that, just this variation. And here is the first pressing variation C from very early 1969, but not so late in 1969 that it's a variation without the soul in the UK. That's yet to come. And as you can probably tell, Garrett and Lofthouse sleeve, because the stereo is above the border. And here is the variation C. Now, I would say this is more similar to the variation B in terms of small stereo. However, the years have just gone back to being on the left hand side rather than being on the left and the right, as was on the variation A. So this is just like the earlier variation. And they would all stay on one side for every other pressing after this. It's still got the sold in the UK text at the minute. And that's the three variations of the first stereo pressing. And here is a second pressing of this album from 1969. Now, interestingly, the stereo has totally vanished from the top right hand corner. I'm not really sure why that is, but now there's just no stereo at all. Anyway, here is the label for the second pressing. Now, it looks just like the variation C of the first pressing, except of course it's got no sold in the UK, as the 69 pressings usually don't have. But other than that, it is just the same. Dates on one side, small stereo, etc. Now here is the third pressing from 1969 until 1970, which is of course the one box pressing. And there's the one box label. Side 1 and side 2. And by the way, the stereo has been replaced on the cover now. It seems to just be kind of hanging in between the border and the picture now, but that doesn't really matter because all the covers are made by Garrett and Lofthouse. So here is the fourth pressing from 1971 until 1973, and this of course is the first two box label. And here it is with the Gramophone Company Limited text. And here's side 2. You may notice that the dates are on both sides again now. They do that for quite a few of the two boxes, but obviously there was only the variation B of the stereo first press, and they had that for the black and yellow labels. Now, this next copy of Beatles Oldies was one of the first ones I got. It might even have been the first one I ever got, actually. And it's always been a mystery, and I'll show you why it's always been a mystery. First of all, the cover is unlike any other I've seen, or at least any other that I've got in my collection. I have seen other copies like this. Now, ordinarily, most copies obviously have the name of the album on the spine, like albums are supposed to. That doesn't want to focus. Well, anyway, obviously it's got the spine name on, but as you can see, it's also got it on the top here. That's upside down. It's also got it on the top of the cover. Now, I'm not really sure why it would. Unfortunately, this copy's damaged actually, so most of that's been taken away, but you can see where the name is there. You can see Oldies. And it's also on the bottom of the cover. So it has that in 3 different places. Not really sure why, but that's interesting. But that's not the only thing about this copy that's weird. I'll show you what it is. Right, now this is a 2-box label. Very similar to the last one. Here it is. Except that there's a couple of differences. And the first one is that rather than being kind of black and white, It's really sort of black and silver. And you might also be able to notice a slight sort of groove in the label. Not really sure what that is. And also, nowhere on this label does it say made in Great Britain. Now, I'm not by that saying that this is a foreign pressing by any means, because it really doesn't seem like one at all. However, it would normally say made in Great Britain either under the EMI box or at the end of the or at the end of the perimeter text there. However, it doesn't say it in either of those places. So I really don't know what this one is. However, I do have a bit of a theory, so I will come back to that one in a few minutes after I've shown a few other copies, because there's something that's quite relevant to it coming up. Anyway, so this is a Pathé Marconi pressing from 1973 to 1975, and this was pressed in France during the oil crisis of the mid-70s in England, because money for pressing records was obviously getting less and less because of the oil needed to make the records. So Pathé Marconi did a lot of Beatles albums from 73 till 75, and here's one here, made in France. Now you can get this for pretty much every album actually. I do have some more somewhere that I haven't shown in my previous videos. This has got EMI Records Limited on the perimeter text, and as you can see as well, everything is just kind of spaced out a bit more than on the usual two boxes. It's most notable on the 33 and the 3rd here. That's really big. And there's side 2. And this is just a duplicate copy of the Pathé Marconi pressing, so we can just bypass that one. And here is the 5th pressing from 1976 until 1980. This has the EMI Records Limited perimeter text, and is obviously just a 2-box. Nothing too special about this one, but this is the 5th pressing. So this was a Philips contract pressing from 76 until October 1980. So this was pressed by the Philips factories. And here's the label. Now, hopefully you can see that there is a large groove going all the way around the label, around the outside there, and that is the dead giveaway that this is a Philips pressing. I'll show side 2 as well. And also, it has 2 sets of matrix numbers, which shows you that it's a Philips pressing, and I'll try and show you those best I can. Now it has the usual EMI ones, which is the YEX620-2, and then a little bit further along, in different font, it's got PCS 70. Can't see what it says. 7016-B, yeah. So it's got 2 sets of matrix numbers there. And that also shows that it's a Philips pressing. So now we'll quickly return to the mystery one. Now, this one does have a groove in it, but it's a different type of groove to the Philips one. However, it does have the same second pair of matrix numbers as the Philips ones do, if I can try and find that. Yeah, this one also has PCS 7016-B, and there's the EMI ones there. So I've got no idea if this is some weird version of the Philips contract pressing or not, or maybe if it was just some other factory. Even if that was the case though, that still doesn't answer the question of why the proper Philips contract pressing, if you look at the perimeter text there, that does have made in Great Britain on, whereas this one, the mystery one, made in Great Britain, is nowhere to be seen. So I'm still not too sure on that one. So here's the 6th pressing from 1980 until 1984. And here is the final 2-box label with the all rights of the producer text on there. Side 1 and side 2. Now, although that was the last pressing on the Parlophone label, in 1983, in July 1983, the budget label called Fame released this on their label. And you can see that in the top right corner, it's now got Fame across the corner there. So you can see that they've pressed it, and also on the back it says Fame at the bottom. And got a barcode at the top too, with a Fame catalogue number. And here is the Fame label. It's kind of got like a grid in the background there. So as you can see, that's very different to the Parlophone pressing. And this is from 1983. And here is the variation B of the Fame label, which was made until the beginning of 1984. Now, as you can see, it's just the same as the last one, except it's had like the grid removed in the background, so it's now just like red text and black text on like a cream logo. Sorry, not a cream logo, a cream background. So this was the last pressing ever of a collection of Beatles oldies. That variation just there. Okay guys, so that concludes my video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week for Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.